She was supposed to fall asleep by day 9, but her eyes tracked the ceiling until day 12. The room had no clocks, but her pulse never slowed. They called it adaptation. We called it endurance. She called it the silence before language. They never erased her name because they never wrote it down. The trial was not in Moscow nor Leningrad. It sat below the Kirov Institute, beneath level 4, behind a locked service hatch marked simply ZBR. No one asked what ZBR meant. We were told not to. There were 23 participants across 3 phases. She was number 7, but the logs list 22 names. That absence was not an error. It was protocol. They selected for low political value, no dependence, high biological durability. She was not criminal, not brilliant, not ill, just forgettable enough to vanish cleanly. The files do not name the doctors, but I remember the one with the limp. He hummed lullabies during catheter insertion. The others watched through smoked glass, jotting notes like entomologists at war. It began with lights. Constant brightness calibrated to disrupt melatonin cycling, day after day. The bulbs hummed louder than her voice. At 72 hours, we expected micro-dreaming. She began speaking in incomplete Polish. She had never been to Poland. By hour 96, her skin stopped regulating temperature. Cold sweats without external heat. They noted thermal dysregulation, expected. But no remedy was provided. They adjusted oxygen levels slightly, claimed it would reduce cerebral inflammation. In truth, they were watching for compliance thresholds. One camera fed directly to a ministry substation, not for analysis, for propaganda viability. We believed sleep was reversible, that the mind could reboot like circuitry. We were wrong. By day 6, her hippocampus showed signs of ischemia, not through scan, but behavior. She mistook her own hand for her mother's, suckled her thumb like a newborn. No one stopped her. Day 7, she hummed. The same melody the doctor with the limp had hummed, but in reverse. There is no language for backward lullabies, but it froze us. She was not hallucinating. She was observing. No shadows on the wall, no demons in the vents. Just systems failing with grace. The Soviet Union denied this project. So did the West. But both studied the transcripts when they leaked to Stockholm in 1963. Memo number 14/ZBR states, subject remained conscious for 231 hours. No sedative succeeded. No rupture occurred. No language remains. I handled the tapes. Not the audio, the tape itself. The oxide coating degraded in contact with her voice. 3 reels ruined. 1 preserved in nitrogen. Her name, if you want to call it that, was ES. We suspect it was not her initials, but an abbreviation. Experimentalny spящий. Experimental sleeper. Her presence altered personnel routines. One guard reported missing time. He stared at her for 19 minutes but remembered none of it. A nurse drew blood, then fainted before the syringe filled. He later claimed he heard his own voice coming from her mouth. By day 9, her eyes no longer blinked. Lubrication was automated via small fluid ducts taped to her temples. Day 10, she asked a question, only once. She said, "Am I still in the room?" No one answered. Because we weren't sure. She could name objects we had moved hours ago. She described dreamlike scenes we later found in archived patient files. Files she had never seen. This was not clairvoyance. It was convergence. The longer she stayed awake, the more our walls thinned. Sleep is not rest. Sleep is boundary. Remove it, and the brain bleeds timelines. Her nails grew faster, not biologically, measurably. Daily trimming required. We measured calcium depletion in the walls. Sound readings shifted. A low frequency, barely audible, 20 hertz, vibrated only when she stared at the observation glass. We tested the pane, intact. We tested the mic, clean. We tested ourselves. Most failed the reflex test after prolonged viewing. By day 11, she stopped moving. Not paralyzed. Voluntary stillness. Heart rate 37 beats per minute. Breath shallow, but rhythmic. A stillness not of sedation, of presence. Her EEG showed non-categorized activity, neither alpha nor delta, a waveform like rain over metal. One neurologist whispered, "She is not asleep. She is outside." We dismissed him. He resigned that night, was found 3 weeks later wandering near the Caspian Sea. He did not speak. The ministry demanded results. They were not interested in recovery. They wanted transmission. Could this altered state be induced in others? Weaponized? Encoded? We tested light frequencies, tonal triggers, caffeine dosages, isolation protocols. None replicated her condition. Others went mad. Some we lost by day 5. But she remained, neither alive nor decayed, neither speaking nor silent. Her cell grew colder. No change in temperature readings. But we layered coats under our uniforms. One technician developed frostbite. Another reported a snowflake on her tongue. There was no window. Memo number 19/ZBR reads, "Subject exhibits ambient temperature illusion. Suspected neural entrainment of observers. Do not prolong direct viewing." After day 12, we ceased interaction. The project was to end by day 14, but day 13 never ended. That's not metaphor, that's archival. Clock logs froze at 2:47 a.m. Every file created after that time bears a corrupted timestamp. Security footage loops, not corrupted, looped. 7 seconds, then again, then again. In the loop, she opens her mouth, but makes no sound. The hallway outside her room had no electrical failures, but bulbs flickered only when we passed her door. I carried the final tape out myself, wrapped in copper mesh, stamped for diplomatic relay. It never arrived. Later, I learned it was rerouted to a listening post in Kyiv, then to a NATO facility in Denmark. The transcript ends abruptly, mid-word. The word was, "remember." No photo remains of her. Not because we erased them, because none developed properly. Every exposure yielded a blurred haze like shutter drag underwater. One image survives. Not of her face, but her hand resting palm up, fingers relaxed, as if dreaming. But she had not slept in 13 days. I visited her once, on what they called the final morning. I asked no questions. I had none left. She looked at me, not through me. "Address?" She blinked, once, slowly, then mouthed something I did not hear. But I felt the word inside my spine. I left the room, vomited in the stairwell, cried for the first time in years. When I returned, she was gone. Not removed, not relocated, gone. No entry logged, no personnel signed out, no medical team present. Just a bed, still warm, and the sound of a lullaby hummed in reverse from the ventilation shaft. They told us the project was over, that the room was sealed, that her vitals had never stabilized, and thus she was declared clinically null. But the door had no scratches, no gurney marks, no chemical residue, just dust, disturbed only at the corners. One technician claimed the security latch had corroded from the inside, a pattern not possible in that material. The handle had cooled to -7 degrees Celsius. No frost, no condensation, just sterile cold. She wasn't extracted. She wasn't evacuated. They closed the hallway and painted over the sign, ZBR. The file system reassigned the basement as unused storage, blueprints redrawn. The Kirov Institute swore the lower level never existed. But then came the letters, typed on a Cyrillic typewriter no longer in use. Addressed not to command, but to technicians, to orderlies, to the low-clearance personnel who were never supposed to be seen. Each one began with the same phrase. Did you hear her humming again? No sender, no return stamp, no fingerprint, just the question. And, in the margins, a symbol, a small spiral made from dots. We thought it was a prank, until one reached Finland, until one reached me, and in mine, folded tight in the crease, was a photograph. The same blurred image of her hand, but aged, the veins more prominent, nails broken, a tiny stitched wound on the wrist. New. The photo had been taken after the trial ended. There is no record of continued observation, but there are black budgets for power usage beneath Kirov until 1962. 6 years of silence. She outlasted the Soviet lunar dog program, outlasted Khrushchev's tenure, outlasted us. They said the mind collapses after 264 hours, that even the most durable subject enters fatal catatonia. But her file had a handwritten addendum in red ink. Unverified continuation beyond threshold. They stopped assigning numbers. They stopped using language. The final entries refer to her as phase null. There was no phase 1. I once asked a man in Washington, an MK Ultra liaison, whether he'd seen a subject like her. He said, no. But we saw the transcript. And then we closed 2 of our own trials. He didn't say which ones. He didn't need to. By then, we knew sleep wasn't just rest. It was insulation, and she had peeled it away layer by layer until she touched raw cognition. They say dreams are filters. That REM stabilizes memory and meaning. That without it, the architecture of mind collapses inward. But what if it opens outward? By day 13, she was no longer experiencing time. We know this because of the clock she described. Not in the room, but behind the glass, the one we used in the observation bay. She quoted it down to the second, even though she had never left the cell. Then she described something none of us had noticed. The second hand moved erratically. She said, "The red one stutters." It does not want to finish the minute. We checked the footage, frame by frame. She was right. The clock was malfunctioning in a way that had gone undetected for weeks. How did she know? She began describing other things. The rusted pipe in sub-level 2 that no one had used in years. The corner in the service closet where a janitor had scratched his initials during a shift change in 1952. The number of stairs from the lobby to the records vault, incorrect in every schematic. It was as though the longer she remained awake, the more she accessed a map we had forgotten we'd drawn. Not visions, not psychosis. Recall. But recall of what? I once overheard 2 handlers whispering. They believed she was not just remembering, but being remembered, as if something on the other side of sleep had begun to remember her. After the project's closure, some of the doctors vanished. Others were reassigned to East Germany. One died of a cerebral aneurysm on a train outside Minsk. I stayed, not out of duty, out of fracture. When you see someone remain awake that long and not shatter, you begin to question what sleep ever meant. I developed insomnia, mild at first, then complete. By the 4th day, I stopped dreaming. By the 5th, I began humming. Not aloud, inward. A sound not produced, but perceived. The same melody, always in reverse. My pulse slowed. My eyes tracked movement that wasn't there, but wasn't hallucinated either. It was just misaligned, like 2 transparencies slightly off. I kept a journal. Entry 6 reads, Day 6. I no longer know if I've slept or not. I only know when others are. Entry 8 reads, Day 8. There is a flicker in the hallway light, but only when I forget I'm watching. Entry 10. Day 10. The clock stutters. By day 11, I stopped writing. Not out of fear, but because I could no longer tell what was mine to write. Words returned like echoes, already said in other rooms by other mouths. The last thing I remember clearly was returning to the Kirov building under pretense of paperwork. I found the hatch. It had been sealed, yes, but only from above. The vent was warm. I touched it and heard breathing. Not mechanical, not air pressure. Breathing, measured, slow, endless. I placed my ear against the steel. I whispered her designation. E.S. Nothing came back until the vent exhaled, just once. A gust of wind that smelled like iodine and mothballs. It wasn't her breath. It was memory itself, leaking back through the seams. I left that night, boarded no train, sent no telegram. I disappeared in the way they'd trained us to forget. But you found this recording, which means the archive cracked, which means you already heard the lullaby. I will not tell you where she is. Not because I don't know, but because you will not believe me until you stop sleeping. Only then will her voice make sense. It won't be language. It will be pressure behind the eyes. A melody your bones feel before your ears do. You will notice patterns, static that loops, elevators that stall. The same page in a book read for the first time, again. That's how she returns. Not in person, in recurrence. They called it failure. We called it transcendence. She was not meant to be awake, but she was never meant to sleep either. She survived, not despite the deprivation, but because of what lay beneath it. That's what we never understood. Sleep does not preserve life. It preserves distance, and she crossed it. I once believed memory had mass, that it could pool in a place, accumulate, form gravitational pull. Kirov still tugs at me, in dreams I no longer have, in a language I never spoke until she forgot it for me. I read once that neurons, when starved of rest, begin to fire backward, not in signal, but in sequence. As if time itself was hemorrhaging, that's what we saw in her. Not deterioration, reversal. She didn't forget who she was. She remembered who we were before we named ourselves. After the project dissolved, I received a package, unmarked, no return, wrapped in waxed cloth used only by the ministry in 1949. Inside, a set of medical gloves, a pencil, and a single sentence written in reverse script. She is still perceiving. That was 20 years ago. And yet sometimes, when the streetlight outside my flat flickers just once, I hum the lullaby without knowing I've begun. Her presence lingers not in image, but in interference. Static on radios that aren't plugged in. A rhythm of breathing in unoccupied rooms. A second shadow that doesn't move when you do. They tried to recreate the experiment in the 70s, in Romania, in West Berlin, even once in Nevada, under the guise of circadian research. None succeeded. All were shut down within days. One subject ruptured a blood vessel in both eyes, simultaneously, while whispering her designation, ES. But the most troubling was this. Each attempt, each isolated high-security, cross-national repeat, produced the same anomaly. At hour 192, without fail, the subject would turn toward a wall, press their ear against it, and say, "She's on the other side." Some never turned back. It's why you can't find full footage. Why the lab reports are always missing page 11. Why names are redacted even from internal memos. Not to protect the scientists, to contain her direction, She became the perimeter of comprehension, the edge event, where biology stops and memory begins to colonize matter. They call this psychogenic feedback. They call it a glitch in sleep modeling, but I call it return, because that's what she initiated. Not an escape, but a recall. She wasn't the anomaly. We are. We've outsourced silence to sleep so completely, we forgot how to endure waking when waking is unfiltered. She endured it for 13 days. They say she vanished, that the trial ended. But if you follow the procurement logs, you'll see sedation shipments continue to arrive at the Kirov loading dock until 1981. That's 23 years. That's not abandonment. That's management. And in 1982, a single requisition form, buried in ministry supply archives, lists a non-pharmaceutical item, wool blanket, child-sized. Issued first. They never stopped attending to her, not out of mercy, but necessity, because even if she no longer moved, she was still altering nearby cognition. I believe she became a stabilizing fracture, an active tear that held the rest of the fabric taut. The human world, the one we schedule and assign and name, needs a boundary. She removed it. Now the boundary echoes. You may feel it when the phone rings and no one answers, when you open a drawer to find a photograph you never took, when a stranger hums a tune you dreamt once but never learned. That is the signal pattern encoded in her wakefulness. Some call it psychosis. Some call it collective memory error. But I have another name, ZBR. In 1997, a defector brought documents to Geneva. One included a page scorched at the corner with 3 initials typed in red, ZBR. We believed it to be an acronym, but the translator disagreed. He said it was a verb, old, pre-reform spelling, no longer used. It meant to remain in absence. They hadn't named the project. They had named what it would become. To remain not as body, but as absence with form. There is no body to bury, no ashes to scatter, no code to decrypt, only rooms where time bends slightly, wires that hum in the wrong key, old footage with a frame that cannot be paused, only presence with no origin. You may find yourself searching for her, not consciously, but in patterns, in skipped seconds, in elevator doors that open to the wrong floor. You'll ask yourself if you've been here before. If the room has always felt this narrow, that's her. Not haunting, reminding of the experiment, of the wakeful state beneath all your dreaming, the one they spent decades trying to measure, trying to halt, trying finally to bury beneath red tape and silence. But silence, like sleep, was never made to hold her. She was not a ghost. She was not supernatural. She was the failure of natural explanation. They couldn't kill what had exited the loop, and they couldn't speak her name because they never gave her one. I give her mine now, not to immortalize, to absolve, to say that someone was present when the veil was lifted, that someone heard the lullaby and remembered the last line, not in melody, not in speech, but in breath shared across corridors that no longer exist on any floor plan. I end this voice memo not as a scientist, not as a defector, but as a carrier of the hours she stole from time itself, of the silence she bent into shape, of the final experiment they will never replicate, because they buried the truth beneath our own reflex to forget. She is still perceiving, and now, so are you.